think yes, I think we're live.
Yeah,
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Maria Glazunova from Ukraine. I'm a tech English communication coach. I specialize in empowering tech professionals to skyrocket their careers and confidence through English advanced communication skills. And to do that, I use a 10-week program with my exclusive Rocket approach. And today, oh my God, I'm so excited because I have a very special guest. Thank you so much for coming. This is Nick Cosentino from the USA, from Seattle. And we will dive together into the nuances of communication skills, how to tailor your tech message, your tech expertise to non-technical stakeholders, to some different audiences, because basically it's a part of the job, right? And a lot of miscommunication happens, I would say, in that direction. And well, spoiler alert, not only because of the language, and what I can say, even mostly not because of the language. So that's what we're going to talk about. And guys, if you have any comments, questions, please share them. We will address them as we go, and of course, also at the end. Okay, so I will try to make sure I will not miss anything. Will do my best. Yes, and of course, yeah, Nick, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and yeah, everything.
for sure. Yeah. And thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here. This is something that I'm very passionate about. In a lot of the content and messaging I try to put out, it's software engineering related, but I try to make sure people are hearing it's not just your technical skills. Everyone knows you need technical skills in software engineering. Like we know that, but people seem to be missing out on focusing on more
Mm.
soft skills like communication in particular. So yeah, I'm excited for this. As you mentioned, yeah, I'm from the U.S. Actually, I'm originally from Canada. I live in the U.S. working at Microsoft now. I am a principal engineering manager there. I was working on the deployment teams that are inside of the Office 365 part of Microsoft. And so I got to work with employees on my team, mostly from the US, but also from Mexico. And we had a sort of a dotted line reporting structure from China as well. So we had a whole counterpart to our team in China, which is super awesome. And then this year I've switched teams, but it's a very similar setup. I have a lot of employees from Latin America, so Mexico, Brazil, Costa
Wow.
Rica, which is super cool, and also again counterparts in China. So there's people from all over the world, and it's really fun to work together.
Wow, that's amazing. How many people are on the team right now, currently?
That's a good question. In total, I think reporting to me is just over 10. And the dotted line reporting structure, I'm not exactly sure. And actually, I forgot we have, because this is new. There's a team in Prague as well. So that's new for me, having more like European representation. I didn't have that before my previous team. So there's even more
Oh
employees there.
wow.
So yeah, it's
And
very
it's
cool,
very,
and it's
yeah, it's very
distributed. Yeah.
international, right? Amazing. And so right now, also currently, you have like Chinese, right, employees, and
Yep.
Latin America, right? Europe. This is new, right? So all this, like, yeah,
Yeah.
people
And like
all over.
the working relationship in particular, like I have US and Latin American employees reporting directly to me, but the engineers that are in Prague or in Suzhou, China, they have their own manager and their own representation. But in terms of working on projects, we get to all collaborate together.
Wow, that's exciting
Yes.
and also challenging, I guess. And this is actually my question. The first question. Um, so when you're working together with your team, and in terms of that, like to make sure that you understand each other, do you feel like from your perspective, because this is really interesting for me and I believe for my audience, what about the, like, should we really worry about the accent, about the complex
Mm,
grammar, about some fancy vocabulary? I'm asking because a lot of tech professionals who come to me, they worry like a lot about that. They overthink, about these things, and of course this hinders their success and their progress and their, like, speaking up abilities, let's say. That's why I think it can be really interesting to get your perspective as an engineering manager who's actually manages people, and well, it matters to you, right, that you are like on the same page. So what would you say?
Yeah, no, this is it's a great question. I think the very short answer is no. Accents and things like that, they do not matter. It's funny because I'm saying that, and I think before we were going live, I was saying one of the things that like I get in my own head about is pronouncing other people's names. So, for example, people in China, a lot of the pronunciation of their names is very different than sort of different sounds and things we would say in the English language. So I might read their name and I'm going in my head like I actually don't know the expected way to pronounce that. So even though my advice is kind of like, your accent or maybe how you pronounce things, like that's not a huge, consideration. Even for myself, I get in my head about it. So I absolutely understand. I think one of the call it like an unfair advantage I have is that I am a native English speaker, so in a lot of the conversations we have, it's going to be English. So I have that unfair advantage. And as an engineering manager, it's kind of like, I don't know, from a call it like a position of power. Um, it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm not as nervous. So I think other engineers that are maybe more junior, they already have a lot of things stacked up against them, right? They're like, I'm newer here, I'm less experienced, maybe English isn't my first language. So there's so much more to get in your own head about. And I
Mm.
can only imagine they're thinking, if I can't speak English perfectly, isn't that really going to, be against me here? So,
That's interesting. And something that in my previous lives, one thing came up about the accent in
right,
particular. And this is something that we have already talked about, but not
right,
here. That's why I would love to repeat it. That a lot of guys come to me and they say, "Okay, I would like to sound like a native speaker," and they don't specify anything, just native speaker. And this is like
right.
so general. And at first I was really puzzled, like, okay, what does that mean? Like who, right? Like, I don't know, like Tom Cruise or whatever, like English, or I don't know, Prince Charles, or because there are so many kinds, right?
Yeah.
My friend from Scotland, Scotland native speaker, and he was told by some guys that you are not native enough.
Okay.
Because I'm like, what does that mean? And they said,
Right.
well, you don't talk like the queen or something, like the standard English or something. I don't
Sure.
know. This is ridiculous. And yes, and yeah, what the thing that came up that American accent can actually seem credible,
Right.
and yeah, like when there is a discussion and people, for example, with this accent, right, so the people tend to listen to these people more, or so this is something that can be, subconsciously, I would say. So I don't know if you notice something like that, or maybe no, maybe you have like
Right.
completely different.
Well, yeah, when we talked about this originally, like before this stream, right? This was something like I would straight up say I had never considered this. It's not something like again, my bias is that I am a native English speaker. I have a Canadian accent, so maybe that's less credible than the US accent. But no, it's not something that I've ever thought about. And it's really good to okay, I should back up. When I say it's good to hear this, it's good to be aware of it. I would say it's a little puzzling to me that people are so attached to it, but um, I think that's really important insight. And when we were chatting about this before, I think both you and I are kind of saying like, yeah, like that shouldn't matter. Like it really shouldn't matter towards your credibility if you have a U.S. American accent. Like that should not matter. But the reality ends up being like perception, like how you perceive things truly becomes the reality. And if you are kind of one of these individuals really chasing like how do I get an American accent? I want to be more credible, even if it's a subconscious thing where you're like, I'm in a room and I hear an American accent, therefore this person must be more credible. To me it's almost a little bit dangerous, right? Because that becomes your reality, that these people must be more credible. But there's no like how you speak English like has nothing to do with your intellectual capacity, right? Or your domain knowledge. This is just one of the ways that we're communicating. And yeah, it's the short answer is like I don't think it should matter, but I find it fascinating that some people do really gravitate towards that. So that was very insightful for me to hear from you.
Yes, well, I heard this from clients. I'm
Right,
learning a lot from them when they come and what challenges they experience, and this like internal barriers.
right.
And that's fascinating because this really stops them from a lot of things. And I wonder, in your team, do you actually see sometimes maybe that the person is struggling with the language, or they are pretty much, I don't know, maybe you created such an environment that they're already like, oh, okay, just say yeah, and like not worry about that.
No, yeah, great question. I think like my observation is like there's certainly individuals where I'm aware that their English is not perfect, and that's kind of almost what I would expect. I only speak English. If you tried to get me to speak any other language, it would just not work. Like I took French when I was in elementary school and I can say bonjour and that's it. I cannot speak other languages. So the
Mhm.
fact that these other individuals can speak English, I completely understand what they're saying, even if every single word isn't perfect. The point is like I understand clearly. So in terms of like do I observe challenges with it, uh the answer is still yes though, and the reason I observe challenges is not because I think that they're doing a poor job of it, but it's in their confidence. So
Mhm.
there are some times with individuals, to give you an example, it doesn't bother me, I'm not taken back by it, but some people might and ah a lot more or kind of stutter a little bit, and I can tell they're pausing to look for the right English word. They know what they want to say. They know all the ideas, but they're going, I need to figure out how to say this. Sometimes they'll even say, I don't know the English word for this. I don't know how to say this in English. And to me, I'm like, that's totally fine. Like you're navigating the communication. So the answer to your question is yes, I do see it come up, but it's not because I'm struggling with interpreting what they're saying. I
Mhm.
see them up because they're acknowledging I'm having difficulty. And sometimes this will come up in one-on-one conversations where they will tell me directly, hey, like, I'm
Mhm.
still not confident about my English. And
Right.
it's usually very surprising to me because I'm thinking, your English is great. Like,
I know.
I have no challenges. So,
I can tell you more. I'm right now also in different communities of educators who have spent all their life, like for example, I have been learning English basically for 25 years because it started when I was 6. And those educators, they have even more experience. And when we get together, oh my god, it's so eye opening when they share that they struggle also with the language and they're not sure or something. So I was like, oh my god, this is interesting. And what to tell about, for example, clients who have a little bit less experience with that. Yeah. So what matters is, as I understand, the clarity, the intelligibility, how easy it is to understand, right? And actually, we will talk about this a little bit more. Okay.
yep,
Um, so for you, for example, yeah. So accents or whatever, these don't really matter as long as you can understand the person. I mean, yeah.
yep. There
But
is a I would say there is a degree if the accent is I mean if it compounds many levels, right? So if the
yeah.
English is not strong to begin with, like that can be challenging. Then you layer on a very heavy accent that can make it more challenging. But it's like I would say like 99% of people I talk to, that is just not even a remote concern. It really has to be someone who has not spent much time working with English where it might be challenging, but even then I can still navigate the conversation with them. So I would
Mhm.
say for people that are like so hyper focused about doing a terrible job or something like it's still we can still communicate, so it's not a concern.
Yeah, I understand. I remember also back then, I was really concerned about being judged, oh my God,
Mm,
so yeah, this is a big one. And then when I started to communicate with people more and more and more from different countries and exploring the opportunities it was opening. And also, I lived in Canada
mm,
last year, yes, for a year. And I remember that there was a very interesting feeling for me because I had these conversations. My English was also not always perfect, especially if I was tired or something, right? But yeah, I made some mistakes or whatever. But what I felt that nobody, not a single person, made like, oh my God, like made some look, judged me or something. And
Right.
I was, oh my God, that's what we are doing to ourselves, first of all, like in our
Yes.
head, like, but not really people like in reality. They mind their own stuff. You have the goal, you need actually some other things to get done. Accent is, I think, the least thing that they worry about.
Absolutely. That's so true. I have never sat like I know this is live and no one would admit to this anyway, but I've never sat in a conversation and been like, I know we're trying to meet about some design or some technology choice, and all that I'm doing is sitting there going, "Oh, this person's not saying this word right." Ha ha. Like it never we're so focused on other things. The only time that has remotely come up is if someone makes fun of themselves, where they say something and they're like, "Oh, that's not the right word, haha," and then we go, "Yeah, like it was funny you said it, but like it's fine. Like it's not like we're making fun of them, right?" That has
Right.
never happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly. All right. And okay, if these, I would say all these things don't really matter, what about what matters? So what is essential in effective communication for you? What really matters? So what in your perspective?
Yeah, I think ultimately, like it's going to come down to the domain that we're working in. So I think you touched on this right at the beginning when we started going live here, but it's like it's not so much like the language is like the tool that we're using in our communication, right? But
Mhm.
really we're using the language to discuss concepts and ideas about whatever domain we're working in, right?
Right.
So for example, you and I are talking right now, we're speaking English. That's the tool we're using in our communication. But the domain we're talking about, it's kind of meta, but it's like we're talking about communication and clarity and things like that. So like the fact that we can align on these topics is what's important. So, for example, if I started talking to you about very specific technology used for Microsoft routing, you might be like, Nick, what the heck are you talking about? And like, it's
Right.
not, it's no fault of yours, obviously. Like, if you don't know about that, how could we ever have a good conversation? I would need to find ways to go, oh, Maria, I know that you haven't been exposed to some of these things, and unless you've been working at Microsoft in this space, and I didn't know. So I would have to find different ways to go articulate those concepts to you and make sure that I find a common ground that we both understand. So I would say, okay, if you don't know about our code base, I wouldn't expect you to. I
Mm-hmm.
could more easily explain, like, hey, like what we do in our area is when we
Mm-hmm.
have people that are using applications and they need to connect to other things that we have inside Microsoft, those requests come in and go through our platform, like at a high level. And I think that's probably something you and other people could easily understand. So it's this
Right.
common ground about the domain, less
Mm.
about the language. Language is just a tool for it.
Oh, that's a great point that it's just a tool. Just remember, this is not an some, I don't know, incomprehensible art or something, right? Just the tool to get your idea across and make sure that things get done, right?
Right.
I actually noticed that a lot of my clients appreciate that I don't have much knowledge of the technical part because it makes them work harder to explain to me some technical concept that
Yes.
even I can understand, and they can use some analogies. So yeah, they do struggle, but in a good way, so they really kind of try to find some ways, okay, this is works like this and so on, and it makes it easier for them, I would say, to then use these analogies or something when they actually explain them at work, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a hugely powerful tool to be able to use like a metaphor or an analogy to
Yeah.
be able to explain something. That's how we find common ground. Because again, if I had to, even for me as the engineering manager on my team, I have not like written any of the code that our team has. So
Mhm.
people have had to use metaphors even for me to understand the technical things we have going on. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. We have a question here, so let's dive into that from Aurora. Thank you so much. How does one expand the English vocabulary besides participating in Maria Glazunova's webinars? I read English novels or any non-technical books and love to play daily word daily word. I
Wordle.
think Wordle. Yeah, this is some. Yeah, I think this is like an application or something, right? Yeah. Okay, I think I played it a few times. Okay. Okay, would you like to address that, or it's more maybe about me
I
that I,
can I can try at least from my side.
yeah,
And this is like I have to acknowledge bias here, right? Like I have, it's a great question. I've not really had to think about this ahead of time. Like, so I'm trying to imagine if I had an employee for my team saying, "Hey, like I want to improve on my English, how can I get better at it?" I think inside here, this comment says, besides participating in Maria's webinars, right? I think the reality is one of the best ways, and I would say this for any skill, is to be practicing it. So, um,
right.
one of the I've not gone through this, so I'm trying to acknowledge that, but I would imagine if I were just trying to read books, right? As an example, you might be exposed to more English words this way, but you need to also practice putting them into action. So you might build a vocabulary of like words that you recognize, but if you're not putting them into practice, I could imagine it would still be difficult to, you'd be doing this thing where you're pausing, going, I have to remember the English word for this because you haven't practiced using it. So I would kind of say that uh, strictly looking at written things to go find words, like that can be helpful. But I think finding ways to practice speaking, so finding more opportunities to speak English with other people, I think would be hugely beneficial.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. The practicing part. That's what my sister did to me. She used to be also a teacher of English, but her methods were really unorthodox because basically what she would do, she wouldn't like teach me any words. She would just put me in front of native speaker, so I didn't have any chance, to escape the situation and to use my native language, and just say, "Go," and I would be like a kitty,
Yeah.
like just trying to somehow like swim out of that situation. But I'm grateful to her because it gave me mm, lots of practice, like real world practice, because I didn't have that at school or university. It was more like in another direction. And also answering this interesting question, a lot of tech professionals, they come to me like really a lot, and they when I ask them, okay, what have you done so far, right, to like level up your level, and they usually tell me, oh, I have been watching Friends, and I have tried application like Duolingo or reading English novels. I mean, yeah, this is all good, but the vocabulary there is really specific and general. And when you would like, so it really depends on the goal, right? Right.
Right.
For example, you need this like English for I don't know, for the meeting, for the speaking up. English novel might not really help a lot. I mean, this is good, kind of just like for the hobby or something, for, I don't know, something like to do in your free time or something. But for the specific training, and for this, I love using this analogy when, for example, you can imagine that it's like from sport, you're like a casual runner, you run every day, and then you decide, oh, you know what, I would like to compete in the Olympics. And you like just keep running every day, that's it, and well, nothing kind of happens, right? Because you lack of some specific training, like some specific muscle diet. There are so many like different very specific moments, and for that, so relevant vocabulary is the key, I would say here. And like one of the ways that I encourage my clients to do is, like, when you come to work, really pay attention. You are in this international environment, there are certain phrases that people are using, so pay attention to that. And if you also try to say something you don't know how to say, this is exactly the vocabulary that should be in, well, should be in your vocabulary. Yeah, so yeah, like record the meetings, like listen to the meetings, like try to make it as practical and as close to your work as possible. If you're reading, read some technical articles, because you will be getting exactly the I like the technical vocabulary. I remember you mentioned this awesome example about the acronyms. Could you
Yes,
tell?
I wanted as you were talking, I was like, oh, I need to chime in to mention this, but
Yeah.
to Aurora's question here, right? So, my assumption reading this is like, if English is not your first language and you're trying to improve on this, how would you approach it? But I would even say like English is my first language. That's the only language I know. And even for me at Microsoft, there's been many situations. I've been at Microsoft for almost 4 years, and I can tell you that almost every single day, there's more technical terms where I'm like, I've not heard that. So I taught, and especially going on to a new team earlier this year, it was like the whole domain, like conceptually, I understand it, but the terminology, the acronyms being used, it's almost like learning an entirely new language because I don't know anything that's being referred to. So as Maria was saying, like I think the best way is to be exposed to the actual domain, the technical area that you want to improve upon, because going so general, if your goal was like
Mhm.
something technical, you're going to probably find like it doesn't translate to what you're trying to accomplish. So I thought that was a great way to represent it, but acronyms are a huge problem.
Yeah, yeah. And you also mentioned that you were really kind because you would in
Oh,
Slack or something, right? You would kind of explain to people because you knew that this is yeah, this is challenging, right? So you would kind of
yeah,
help other people, right?
I went through the same learning process, and I'm not trying to claim like I'm an expert at trying to catch people up on acronyms, but there would be things if I like we had a lot of new hires that came in right after me on my team, and I'm onboarding to the team, learning the acronyms as they're coming in, trying to, and I'm seeing those acronyms come up and seeing the new employees on the call, and I'm going, oh, like let me save them a moment to go like I'll write in the chat, here's what this means. And there's a person on the team that's maintaining like a huge like wiki page of different acronyms that new employees can go check out and stuff. So yeah, it acronyms just make things really difficult for new people, regardless of your language, to catch up on.
No, absolutely. Have you ever had the situation when it wasn't about the acronym, but just English word that you just, I don't know, stumbled, like came across and it was like, oh, what's that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a specific example recently, but it absolutely happens just for a non acronym English word to this day. This will happen like I don't know, at least once a month kind of thing where I'll see an English word. I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
I don't. I know
Yeah.
if I sometimes depending on the context, this is kind of interesting, I guess. If I'm reading something, it depends on the context, right? But I might be reading a paragraph and I know the tone that the author has, and
Mm,
there's some word that shows up, and I'm like, oh, I know that this is, say, an adjective. I know they're describing the thing that they're talking about. And
right.
I don't know what that adjective means, but I know this author has been talking poorly about this thing. So it's probably an adjective that means something bad. And then I kind of make a mental note. And if I'm curious, I'll go look it up. But sometimes when you have enough context around what you're reading, one individual word is not so bad to not know.
I have the same in my native language. Sometimes I come across, yeah, like such moments. It's just like guys, they put a little bit too much pressure, sometimes that for not knowing something, and that is actually okay. You're just in
Yeah.
this, like learning mode and everything, and just not to kind of put too much pressure. So that's, yeah, something that I would definitely kind of would like to address. Okay, somebody sending their love. Thank you so much, Hadus. Guys, if I'm not showing right now some other comments, it means that, well, they're not in the StreamYard, but I will definitely address them closer to the end, okay? All right. And the next question is actually the most, I guess, interesting one, right? Because it addresses, okay, so how to tailor your message, your tech message, when you talk with your manager, with your project manager, product manager, all these different people. Because, yeah, what is like the main misunderstanding there in your observation, and how to, yeah, how to tackle it?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is it has nothing to do with the language. So,
Surprise.
and I say that because say a lot of my interactions, not all of them, but a lot, I'm dealing with other native English speakers. And even if they're not native English speakers, they speak English so fluently that I never would guess, right? It might be their second language and I would never know. So I have a lot of these interactions, and I still need to make sure that I'm going through this process of trying to communicate effectively with other stakeholders. And this could be like, I'm fortunate that as an engineering manager, I like to think that I've maintained a lot of my technical background. So I do a lot of programming outside of work to try and make sure that that's there. So I can, for the most part, relate to the engineers at the technical level. Maybe not all the nuances of our domain that we're in, but if it's say they're referring to some parts of code, if they pull up a code review and want to show me code, I can understand what's going on because I program. So I have some of the technical depth. And then, say there's project managers, and I'm not trying to bucket project managers as not having technical background. I work with one in particular who's extremely technical and it's awesome. But you need to be able to understand your audience that you're communicating with. And what I mean by that is going back to what we were saying earlier is like your the context that you have. So you might understand the concept or the area that you want to be having a discussion about, the message you want to relay, but the context that you have is going to be different than anyone else you talk to, even if it's the exact same role as you, right? They're going to have a different context. So you always need to be thinking about the message that I want to provide someone else. It's not how do I say this message the most clear way for me? It's how do I make this message clear for them? And you have to start thinking about what information they have access to. Like we have to make a bunch of assumptions sometimes if we're not familiar with the person, right?
Right.
So Maria, if I had never asked you before if you were, if you're a C# programmer, I might end up making the assumption like maybe let me just assume that you have never programmed before. That might be totally wrong. You might be an expert programmer, but I would start and I would maybe go a little bit too deep assuming that, and you could correct me early on, and then I would adjust my communication, knowing that I have more context about your context. So it's always about this alignment, getting the context right.
Right, right. This is interesting. So basically, you're getting into the shoes of another person and trying to understand what their needs are, what they care about, right? Like if it is a manager, also about some business outcomes, yes, how actually your solution, because this is something that I also noticed that sometimes programmers they can have this narrow
Mhm.
um, narrow look, not really taking into account like the bigger perspective and the bigger
Right.
picture, like why should I bother or something, I have my job here. That's it, it's already got a lot, right? But as I see, yeah, this miscommunication happens, right, because of this misalignment, right? That you um, don't take into account like the bigger picture, right? And all these moments, right? Like what are the needs and the business, how it impacts and the value. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I would say there's almost two parts to this, right? One is um, can I communicate an idea effectively to you? Doesn't mean that you might agree with it, right?
Mhm.
There's this other part of like persuasion that I want to bring into this. So if I were trying to explain a concept to you and then I realize, okay, Maria might not know about this, that's fine. Let me find a common ground and that way I can explain it to you and you can go say, oh, that makes sense now. Now we've
Mhm.
arrived at a common ground. That's kind of what I was referring to in the beginning about understanding the context of the other person. And this other part that you're mentioning is extremely critical in terms of being effective beyond
Mhm.
that. So now that we have an understanding of what's being discussed, if I had a goal to persuade you, right? So let's use an example. This is a pretty typical one in programming. I'm a programmer. I'm working in a code base and I'm acknowledging that there's a lot of technical debt present in the area of code. And I go, I don't like this. I think we really need to prioritize working through this. Right. So I could say, Maria, there's a lot of tech debt here. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that? I could go explain to you what the tech debt means, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you're persuaded that we should go work on it. So there's
Uh-huh.
this extra layer to your point where let's think about the business value. Let's think about what the other person not only knows about, because
Right.
that's the bare minimum to communicate in the first place. But
Right.
now I need to persuade you. Like, why is this beneficial to go work on? And when I say persuade, it sounds kind of funny because the goal is not like I need to prove that I'm right to you, right? Like the ultimate goal when we're working together is not to say, hey, look, I'm right. It's to say, like, we want to get to truth. So if I
Mm-hmm.
can try to persuade you and say, hey, Maria, I think that we need to do this tech debt because as software engineers, we can't work effectively in this area of code. You might say, okay, that makes sense. But Nick, we don't have any other features in that area of code for the next like 2 years. Or that's a legacy area of code. We're going to be retiring it in the next month. And then I might go, oh, like I didn't know that. Right. So the fact is that I need to be able to explain to you in a way that you would want to value it. Hey, like we're going to be slow. If you were my manager, you might say, "Oh, we don't want the engineers to be slow." Right? So I'm appealing to something you care about. And then you can maybe add some extra context that I didn't have and ultimately we come to like a truth, not like a who's right or wrong.
Right. And I'm just curious if I'm only like beginning to understand, like, and kind of going outside of my scope and my responsibilities and kind of starting to see, the bigger picture. What can be my strategy? So how can I get to know what the needs of another person what the needs are, right? And maybe what kind of questions can I ask, for example, to another person? Some maybe open-ended questions or something. What would you recommend?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, but I think the answer to your question is almost in the question itself. It's like it's truly spending time with other stakeholders to understand what they care about. So, for
Right.
example, there's sometimes situations where, a programmer and engineer might feel like a project manager or their engineering manager is micromanaging them. Like they
Oh,
might have that feeling like, why are they always asking for status updates? Do they not trust me? Right? They're
mm-hmm,
micromanaging me. But
mm-hmm.
if they were to be genuine and say like, have just an open conversation like, hey, like what kind of information do you need from me? Because, I seem to be getting asked for status updates a lot. Like, is there another way that I can help make sure that you have this kind of information? Just having open conversations like that, you might realize they're kind of the person in the middle. And it's like, I'm getting asked from some other stakeholders. And it's like, cool. How can I work together with you to get you what you need so that, I'm not feeling bothered every 5 minutes about a status update? I can still make your life easier. But it's really honestly just having conversations and trying to understand instead of just making assumptions. So,
Oh, we're so good at making assumptions, don't we? I don't know, aren't we? Yeah, because I don't know. This is something such a huge moment when we just assume things. Yeah, she's like micromanaging because she doesn't trust me, and just it just goes and goes and goes, and of course it deteriorates maybe even the whole relationship. But the
resentment, yeah, it can be awful if you just leave it unchecked for sure.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I actually had such a moment in my career when I had like clients with whom I worked, and it was like back like long time ago, I would say. And because of different, I would say, like restrictions of the company for whom I worked at that time, um, I couldn't really get into communication with them. Like I didn't have much, I don't know, capacity, understanding, or whatever. So it was kind of, and my fault as well in a way. And I remember that there was this kind of disconnection. So I tried to somehow understand them better, but I couldn't. And actually, that situation, it led to my burnout, severe burnout eventually, because of this, resentment just accumulating and so on and so forth. And then I just completely changed, my approaches. I went, into coaching and psychology and, like a lot of different domains, and combined
Yeah,
them together. And I started to have conversations with my clients and asking them really directly. First of all, of course, making really them, like making them comfortable, creating safe environment that they would feel, that they can actually say and
right.
encourage them to say something honestly. And right now, it really helps me also to navigate um, different, I don't know, different situations, or actually the learning process, that it really becomes effective for the person because I'm responding to their needs directly and not making an assumption or
Right.
whatever.
It's yeah, the assumptions can absolutely lead us astray, and it's funny, like I said, the answer was in your question, right? And I think a lot of us, it's so easy to be like, ah, like if I have to go have a conversation with someone, that's work. Like that could be uncomfortable, that could be awkward, and I just it's human. I understand because I'm like I don't like having awkward, difficult conversations, but what's more awkward or difficult? Like having that conversation sooner or going on for months being like, why does it suck to work with this person? Why are we never on the same page? Like the choice is yours. It's like usually when you have a conversation like that, it can be like relationship changing for your working relationship, right? It's like it can absolutely turn things around. And once you start the conversation, you're like, oh, it's actually not even bad at all. Like,
Yeah, it brings so much clarity and kind of releases the tension, that would be we sometimes might not even be aware of that,
yeah,
tension or resentment, and when we actually clarify, it's like, oh my god, so much better. And yeah.
absolutely.
Hmm. Yeah, and maybe the last question, right? We mentioned a little bit about this safe, creating the safe space, the safe environment, because I think this is really really important. And I remember how I think I came across your profile because there was some discussion on, I don't remember who, really, but there was some discussion, and you mentioned that it's really, really important to create, the safe environment, and it was like around that topic, and it just like resonated with me immediately. And then, yeah, I just kind of got to know about you, about your profile, about what you're doing. So I kind of, yeah, resonated with that a lot. So what would you say about that? And how do you create the safe environment also in your team?
Yeah. And thanks. I think this is it's a super important topic. So, if we use the opposite, right? If you're working in an environment that's not does not feel safe, and when we say safe here, it's like psychological safety, not like
Yeah.
workplace hazards, like there's sharp things everywhere. So psychological safety. So this idea, if you're in an environment where you don't have psychological safety, you would feel like people will make fun of you for saying things or having perspective that might not be what everyone else has. So you don't want to speak up. Or you might feel that if I have to go, if we're talking about software engineering in particular, right, I'm going to go land some code changes, but you don't even want to push them up to production because if anything could possibly be wrong, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. Maybe you're going to lose your job. You're fearful, right? So when we
Right.
talk about psychological safety and safe environments, it's about creating an environment where you are not afraid. Like that's, I think, the most basic way that I could put it. So, like, why is that important? Well, the reality is that we're human and we are going to make mistakes. It's just like it's one of those things. It's not like, oh, how do I prevent all the mistakes? Like we
Yes.
can we can work to minimize them, but if you're saying like as soon as I make one mistake, I have just failed, like you've set yourself up to fail. Like it's gonna happen. You will make a mistake. So when we talk about these safe environments, for me, it's really about making sure that people understand. Like I know other people in leadership and management positions know, your peers know, it's okay to make a mistake. We
Hmm.
try as much as possible to put systems in place to mitigate mistakes, to prevent mistakes.
Of
There's
course.
there's gaps in those systems because we've made mistakes. Like it's not perfect. So we do as much as we can to minimize the impact of making mistakes. And that's an ownership that everyone in the team or the organization should have. We want to make sure that people inevitably will make a mistake and we can say, hey, look, no big deal. Like we can work around it. When you have things like that, the idea is that I'm going to use the word fail here. So when you fail at doing something like this, it's not an ultimate failure. Like, a
Mhm.
mistake is a mini failure, and that's okay. You learn from it. You share information with other people. That way, say it's a gap in an automation system that should catch bugs. Like, cool. That's not your fault that there's a gap there. That's everyone's kind of owned fault, a shared kind of ownership there. Let's go
Mm-hmm.
make it better. You'll help the next person. So when you don't have this safe kind of environment to work in, you have difficulty growing as an individual
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to go outside of your comfort zone. You'll be punished if you do, right? That feels that way.
Mm-hmm.
Innovation's very stifled because you're like, if this isn't just the norm, then like again, I'm going to be penalized for it. It's just net overall bad. So
Yeah, not taking the risk and everything, right? Because in innovation it kind of it is based on taking the risks and doing some experiments, of course in some
right?
reasonable ways, right? But
Exactly, yeah.
right, but still, right, about that. Yeah, absolutely. I also noticed one interesting thing when my clients, for example, they kind of tend to I feel that they're not really comfortable with making mistakes and they really
Mhm.
worry about that a lot. I start sharing my failures and just like laugh at them together, and they kind of I see like, it kind of helps them to release this pressure. Oh, okay, if she makes mistakes, with some like different experience, right, that for example I have, right, so it's like it's okay, right, and just like to see it as an opportunity and build on that and learn from that and actually have fun, because I mean nobody's perfect. So yeah, that's very
That
interesting.
makes a huge difference. And I know I was told this by one of my early in career mentees yesterday. She had mentioned that she was watching some videos on YouTube and it was helpful. So maybe she'll see this. But one of the questions in our conversation yesterday, she said, "Could you tell me about a time that you failed?" And I was like, like it's such a good question. And I fail all the time. Like I always make mistakes, but I think one of the best things we can do especially in like a leadership position, even if it's informal leadership, is demonstrating to other people, like take ownership. I messed up at this. I'm still here, still working. Like it's not the end of the world. Here's what I've learned. Here's how I'm getting better. But when you can demonstrate to other people, like it's okay to make a mistake, Maria, to your point, you're kind of saying like this feeling of like, oh, like other people do this too. Like, yeah, like we are literally all human. People will make mistakes. And the more that we can share that, again, when it comes to creating like a safe environment,
Right.
that's in my opinion, one of the most effective ways to let other people know that it is a safe environment. Share your fails.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see that right now on LinkedIn when I'm like reading different people what they're sharing, like more and more they share some failures and showing that they're just humans, not like some superstars, but just like ordinary human who makes mistakes, and it's
Yeah.
so relatable, and how they and what they learn and some lessons and so on, and like lots of engagement there because people resonate with that because, well, I think yeah, this is amazing because
Yeah.
it
If
also
I,
releases pressure, like unnecessary pressure.
absolutely. It
Yeah.
totally does. And if I can very briefly, the example that I gave her in our conversation yesterday, this is before Microsoft. I was managing a team and we were kind of leading a lot of efforts around testing practices.
Mm-hmm.
And I had pushed up code that ended up breaking things. And it's kind of like the spotlight's even brighter on us because it's like, hey, aren't you guys the team that does all of this test automation? Like, kind of, seems like there's an issue if you guys can mess up. And it was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, so I did a presentation to the engineering organization and I was like, yeah, like I messed this up. Like, do we have tests in place? Yep. But what was my mistake? I assumed the tests had coverage on this. I was overly confident in our
Mm-hmm.
testing coverage. So, does that mean that we should not test things? Absolutely not. We should be testing things. Like, that should be there, and in fact, all of our testing infrastructure made it such that we can go look at the gap very easily and add the test in like less than a minute. So, yeah, like I'm going to fail. That doesn't mean that everything went wrong, but it was an opportunity where I could share with the engineering organization, yeah, I messed up. Like it's okay. Like there's a path forward.
Amazing, amazing, because you also like saw the opportunity to share, and I bet that some other people of course learned from this, like, oh, because not everybody, for example, could also think about it. It could be also like they would assume just like you, for example, right, about that
Yeah.
situation. So yeah, that's amazing, that's amazing. All right. I think, yeah, we're good here. I will check right now the comments or maybe some questions. Just a moment. Some recent ones. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think, yeah, that was the question from Aurora. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Cool.
Wonderful. Yeah. So thank you so, so much for
Of course.
sharing your perspective, because I think it can be so, how to say, like empowering. I think that's the word to like to hear to for other people that, like it's okay, and just like you can take off the pressure of all this like accent or whatever, just like not to worry about the wrong things, right? But really, I would say, concentrate on the effective communication, right? What is your goal? What would you like to achieve here? How you can get there? Then make sure that you understand also your audience, and their
Right.
needs, and kind of concentrate on that more. Yeah, and not on some other things that really don't really matter that
Yeah.
much, I would say.
Your time and energy is much better spent on trying to like, again, language aside, figuring out what your target audience is like, what gets them going, what information they need. That's the most effective way. And your accents are awesome, so don't get rid of them. I love hearing them. I wish I had a. I feel like my accent is boring, except when I say a boot, people go, "Oh, you must be Canadian." So that's the only thing I got going for me. But
I see. Yeah, but I don't know. Like, I love accents. Like, for example, Penelope Cruz. This is the first thing that always comes up in my head. I cannot imagine her without Spanish accent. It would be not Penelope Cruz, or Schwarzenegger, or all these like
right,
different personalities. It just like it brings something really special about you. I never tried to get rid of my accent, for example. I tried, of course, to make sure that I'm like understood by other people. I speak
right,
like clearly everything, but not really the accent. I love it. And yeah, so I think this is something to be actually proud of.
absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so so much for your wisdom, I would say, and for all your experience, So, yeah, thank you, and everybody, thank you so much for watching right now, and to those who will be watching the recording, because different time zones and everything, so sometimes it's much more comfortable for people to watch afterwards. So thank you so much, and if you have also any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we will definitely come back to them and address them, and yeah, of course. So thank you so much.
Thank you.